So a very good morning to everyone. I'm Magdalene from ITIS Capital, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to our third quarter investor call 2021. I hope you all are safe and well. At this time, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to be a part of the call. Before we move into the major part of the call, I'd like to keep my participants informed that all the participants will be in listen-only mode. After a brief presentation by our founder and fund manager, Naveen Chandramohan, we will have the Q&A session. So our focus today will be on the third quarter gone by. This quarter has been one of the strongest for Indian markets, Indian equities, both from the perspective of capex on the ground alongside the demand pickup that we are seeing across a host of industries. This is clearly coming through in the price action that one observes in the Indian markets. From here on, I request Naveen to take over this with a brief presentation. Over to you, Naveen.
Thanks a lot, Magdalene, for setting the context, and again, thanks everyone for making the time to be doing this on a Saturday morning. So just as Magdalene set the context as to where we are, right? I think it's very clear that we are in the middle of a fairly rampant bull market in the Indian equity markets. So in this call, in the middle of a bull market, people are more so interested in which are the stocks to make money in, what are we not holding, what are we not doing well, etc. So the more important question that I want to be doing in this call, just slightly different from rest of the calls, is to basically give an overview of the fund performance, the activity that we've done in the last quarter that's gone by. And just to set the context, right, why Magdalene mentioned third quarter, she's talking about calendar year and not financial year. And then move on to setting some of the facts straight around many of the media narratives that are floating around versus what we think that is actually happening. And finally, opening up the floor to Q&A, which is where we would like to spend more of our time. What normally happens in markets is, especially in a bull market like that we are in today, right? Very rarely do we actually ask the question, what can go wrong? Right? We normally tend to ask the question in bear markets, which makes us a lot more risk averse versus in bull markets, which is actually where we need to focus a lot more on the downside. It may be counterintuitive, but that's what actually ensures equities results in longer term compounding. So like we normally start our call, just to give you a recap from what we said when we finished our June quarter call, right? So we spoke about our portfolio, the way we looked at it being one of the healthiest since inception. And why did we make that statement? Because the cash flow growth of the portfolio was compounding at almost 21% annualized, right? And that's what matters to us from the health of our portfolio. What's the cash flow growing at? There was valuation comfort within our portfolio, right? What I mean by that was the return that the portfolio was generating was actually less than the cash flow growth, and that, according to us, is valuation comfort. We looked at liquidities being adequate and sufficient on the ground for the foreseeable future, and we basically said that the flows into equities were only beginning. This was back in June, right? And we also made a statement saying that looking back, which I'll continue to make, we will continue to look back over the next few years at March 2020 as the biggest financialization event for India, right? Obviously, it needn't have happened the way it did, but unfortunately, we can't reverse things. So we'll have to play with what's given to us. In terms of the fund performance, we're basically breaking down the fund performance from a calendar year perspective, right? So every year, putting the fund performance in context with Nifty 50 in order to basically look at how the fund is done. Has it underperformed, outperformed? If so, why? And what are the pockets in which we are doing well as a fund? So since inception, if we look at how the fund is actually done, we've generated a cumulative return of 205% over a little over 4.75 years since inception. The same period, Nifty is done 115%, which has resulted in a compound IRR-based excess return of 9% per annum, right? And when if people have listened to us on multiple calls, we've always maintained that the objective of running this fund as a single strategy multi-cap focus fund is to continue to beat the index by 6%. That is the target that we set for ourselves. And where did that 6% come from? Because the cash flow growth of Nifty is around 10 to 11% historically and today. And we believe that our portfolio should grow the cash flows. That's what we look at, the kind of companies that we want to be investing in at a high teens IRR. And that's the difference as to why we should be generating a cumulative IRR of, an annualized IRR of excess of 6% over 5-year cycles. The same graph put in another way, right? 1 rupee invested in the fund would be roughly worth 3.05 today versus 2.15 in Nifty. And that gives an annualized IRR of around 9% excess over the benchmark return. One thing that I will always talk about is, where is this excess return coming from in shorter periods of time, right? So we always like to talk as fund managers, as portfolio managers, we always like to talk about long term. And we are also guilty of using the word long term in a very liberal way, right? So we'll also have to see what is generating this excess return in shorter buckets. And when we break it down into shorter buckets, which is on a quarterly basis, obviously Nifty over, let's say, close to 19 quarters since inception of the fund has gone through up and down markets. It doesn't feel like it's gone through down markets with the recency bias that we are in, but it has gone through significant down markets in the last 4.75 years. So if you break that down, right, roughly we're talking about our fund has outperformed Nifty 8 out of 15 up quarters. And more importantly, it's outperformed Nifty on 3 out of 4 down quarters. So just look at the stark difference, right? In a bull market where everything is going up, we are outperforming Nifty around 55% of the time. But just by outperforming Nifty in bear markets, where the market takes you down, the ability for you to generate a 9% IRR, which is fairly significant, exists. What I'm trying to drive home is, end of the day, when in bull markets everyone makes money, it's very easy to look and say, I want to change my philosophy and go after greed. But unfortunately, that's what takes you down during bear markets. So as long as we continue to do this, which is basically protect capital during down markets, continue to compound capital during bull markets, we believe that we will achieve this target over every 5-year bucket that we continue to manage money in. Right? So having said that, what did we do in this quarter? Right? There were 2 basic cleanups that we actually did in our portfolio as we speak. And we'll talk you through why we did that, what is our reading off the ground, where is risk reward for us. In many of the old portfolios that have been with ITIS for, I would say, more than 2.5 years, we had a position in IndiaMart, right? And we completely exited out of this recently. And wherever the portfolios had cash, we actually started building a position in Nazara in the recent quarter that went by. And this position is at 3% as we speak. As I explained through the business of Nazara, I will also elucidate why it is 3% and not something slightly more significant, right? So talking about the IndiaMart sale, right? So just to give you a context, what is IndiaMart? It is a B2B marketplace for SMEs in India. They register in the form of a subscription-based SaaS business. It's used for discovery today. So if, let's say, I am a dealer or a distributor looking for spare parts for an auto OEM, I can basically find a lot of manufacturers listing their products, comparing their products, and I can reach out to them. So end of the day, it's a digital access media as we speak and as they are building out the platform. So if you look at the drivers of revenue, right, like a typical platform, as the number of buyers increase on the platform, it's a good sign. As the number of inquiries delivered increase on the platform, that's again a good sign. The traffic increasing obviously means there are more people coming onto the platform, which means there's a benefit of network effect. And then all this boils down to revenues. How many of these people actually pay for a subscription? Do realize it's not a transaction-based revenue platform. It is a subscription-based revenue platform as we speak, right? So one of the reasons where we felt there could be huge optionality value when we entered the business was the founder actually pivoting from the subscription into a transaction base, because that enables a whole host of lot of financing based businesses like you are seeing in the B2B marketplaces that are being developed in India and the private market space. So a few trends, right? Registered buyers are growing fairly well. The revenues have grown significantly, 20.75% annualized. I'll come to the reduction in expenses in the last 1 year, which is something that I was uncomfortable about. Growth has come through, right? It has come through in the form of revenue growth. But the issue has been in the last 1.5 years, if I break down this business into the fundamental components, you had the best inflection point for the business. SMEs in India are very hard to make pay. They don't want to pay. They want cheap. They want free if given a choice. But they were disrupted with what happened in the last 1.5 years. Their activity on digital platforms like IndiaMart or any of the private market spaces, if you're following that space, companies like Meesho, companies like a lot of other players who've actually come business, these guys have scaled significantly on the back of the last 1.5 years. So if you put that in context, the growth is fairly ordinary, right? However, every growth business at a time when you have an inflection point should be willing, at least according to me, to increase expenses and drive top line, because end of the day the market is giving you an opportunity to basically grow your top line. At that point of time, when I see an entrepreneur saying I want to be cutting back on my staff expenses and reducing my costs and showing a PAT increase, I have a problem. So end of the day, and when this is coupled with the fact that you are actually looking at a valuation which is 85 times cash flow as we speak of FY22, I think from the upside downside scenario, it no longer stacks in well for us, right? So if things normalize itself, and I'll talk you through the global market scenario as to how we are seeing things, what are the risks that we could see, right, on the ground. It may or may not come into fruition, but these are things that we need to think about. I think the position has almost gone up 3x from the time that we bought it. It's done well, reasonably well for us. And considering the fact of some of the risks that we are actually seeing on the ground, we felt it was prudent to get out of the position today as we speak. And it was also influenced by the fact that the private market players are raising funding at a very aggressive level in order to actually grow top line. And they are growing top line because we are seeing a lot of digitization of businesses on the ground. That theme is real. It's not a trend. It is a real theme on the ground that we are observing. Right? So that was the context around why we got out of IndiaMart and why we felt it was a sensible risk reward sale for us to do it. Second is to just give you a brief context of Nazara, right? So Nazara, if you study the history of Nazara, it was a very different company when Nitesh Mittersain set it up in 1999. He basically drove revenues from telco subscriptions, the old telecom players. When you basically you actually partake some of the revenues from them from a commission-based model by sitting on the telcos, which was a dying business. So over time, Nitesh Mittersain is a developer. He is a gamer. He's an avid gamer. When you talk to him, you will see that come out in a very active way. So he brought in the current CEO somewhere around 2015 from ex-Reliance, someone called Manish. And the vision that they started executing was to build a platform infrastructure. So I don't call Nazara a gaming company. Right? A gaming company develops games. They are not developing games. They are a platform infrastructure company who wants to build an audience. So think of it as what IPL did. IPL was a brand which gets paid through sponsorships, ticketing, audience views, merchandise, come what may, and it will expand, right? Very similarly, Nazara will keep acquiring companies in the gaming space to develop a platform infrastructure as the esports market develops. So there are three verticals that Nazara is focused on today, right? The small vertical, which is focused in the US, is something called Kidopia, which is basically a kids-based, targeting 2 to 7 years, gamified learning play store. So that's a subscription-based business, and that's scaling reasonably well today. The second thing is what is called the esports, fantasy sports streaming infrastructure, which basically gets its revenue. So today, a week back, if people had noticed the headlines, PVR came out and said they are going to start showing streaming esports as a concept in the theater, right? Something that was unheard of 5 years back. So if you follow the trends in the US, in Korea, especially in Korea, because a lot of origin of esports happens there. In Europe, less so, but more so in US, Korea, China. China is huge. I mean, China is roughly around, from a gaming perspective, around 120 times where India is as we speak, right? So what is happening is, as the games are being developed, as the infrastructure is basically put in place, gamers, good games want to be on this infrastructure to attract good developers. And then around these good developers, there are what are called talent management companies that are being developed. Very, very similar to how sports developed, right? Sports developed around players. As players made money, there was talent management companies that were set up. There were sponsorship companies that are set up. A very, very similar trend is going on in the Indian esports market. Which is still in its very, very early nascent stages. And finally, the cog in the wheel, as I call it, real money gaming, right? India being India, as we are all know, our country is not famous for clear-cut regulation, right? We will go flip-flop. We will flip-flop saying, is this legal? Sometimes the state governments will come and say it's not legal. There will be risks, be it rummy, be it poker, as each of this develop. These could be big markets if the regulation becomes clear, but I don't see regulation ever becoming black and white in this space. So unfortunately, that risk will always be a black swan event that one needs to price, right? So today we're talking about slightly, as we speak, as of yesterday, roughly just south of $1 billion market cap company, which is roughly generating in top line around 500 crores FY22 as we see it generate, right? Now, this could significantly grow with a 40 to 45% annualized growth rate over the next 3 years. In a base case scenario, there could be significant upsides over it, right? And there are risks. The risks being the fact that the regulatory landscape can make the real money gaming vertical of Nazara have a very digitized 1 to 0 revenue if the state governments come off and say this is not legal, right? So that concept, unfortunately, is something we'll have to deal with. And this goes back to the point of why 3%, right? So if I look at Nazara 5 to 7 years from now, I see two digital events. I see a potential possibility of this scaling to a $10 billion business through the esports and through the Kidopia, and if the regulations don't confuse the individual and the business around what happens with real money gaming, not looking at any upside, just stable regulation, which is a big thing already in our country. On the downside, if there is a flip-flop on the regulations, the market never appreciates flip-flop, right? So you could see a 50% drawdown. And hence it goes back to how we think about position size. If I mean, I will make this statement in an open forum today. If Nazara was in the US, I would have been a lot more comfortable taking a 10% stake, right? In India, unfortunately, you can't do that. At least that's the way we think about risk. For us, it's always about managing the downside first, rather than saying, let's go and maximize the upside. So this is the framework that we have around Nazara, why we wanted to buy the business, why we've been building a position in the business, consciously telling you and making you aware that there are risks in the business. Moving on to the broader portfolio at large, right? So few trends that we saw in the June quarter earnings that I can summarize in a few lines. Obviously, the portfolio has been growing from a very strong perspective in a cash flow growth perspective, right? So I'm not looking at 1 year cash flow growth, because the concept of a 1 year cash flow growth can be misleading, because you're talking about June 20 to June 21. June 20 base is low. So let's go back 2 years. So June 19 to June 21, 2 year annualized growth, cash flow growth of our portfolio is at 22%, right? So I am ignoring the low base effect of COVID, what happened last year. Let's just forget about it for a moment. And that's why I say there is strong growth. Most of the companies continue to show a healthy gross profit margin. Why is that important? I think as any of you investors or any portfolio manager in the market today, one of the big risks that we all have is margins coming down. Why? As you are aware, I mean, as you are close to the market and as you are aware, commodity prices are going up. That's no surprise to anyone. Logistics prices have gone up because of tankers short supply. Power cost is going up. That's more of a recent trend. All this means gross profit margins are going to come down, right? We could celebrate the growth. It's a good thing. India is at an inflection point. There's no doubt about it, but there are short-term headwinds for many businesses that we have. And when you monitor the gross profit margin, and if that doesn't come down, that's what is basically telling you the pricing power of the brand, which means the company that you own or the brands that they own have the ability to pass through this increased effect at a certain scale to the end consumer. And that's what you want to be. Those are the companies you want to be owning, right? Because there is less of volatility in terms of the margins. And why is that important? Because that results in better cash flow growth, as a result of which management has better bandwidth to reinvest it back into the business. So hence, I want to put all three numbers into perspective as to why each one matters, right? It's just not one, but each one in its entirety matters to see what is the real health of your portfolio. I want to spend some time talking about new portfolios today. So as you are aware, it's no surprise, mutual fund volumes have gone up, mutual fund SIPs have gone up, PMS volumes have gone up, PMS monthly inflows are robust. So end of the day, it's really important to spend some time. How do we construct new portfolios? I've always highlighted we are not a model portfolio firm. Just because we have a company that we like and it's done well, we doesn't mean we build the same exposure in a new portfolio that's just come, not paying attention to valuations. We don't like to be doing that. For us, valuations are as important, though the growth of the portfolio and the health is more important. Valuations do come third down the pecking order around how we look at the business. So for us, in this kind of a market, we will take some time to build portfolios and ramp it up into its complete portfolio, like some of the older portfolios that have been with us for the last 2 years. What are we doing today, right? We continue to add exposures in pockets in technology and pharma. Many people have already come to the conclusion that the pharma theme is over, COVID is over, so we are back to normal. That's generally not what. So certain micro trends are working on the ground, especially where many people are not aware of this. Most of the pharma companies that we own, right, the raw material cost from an import perspective from China is less than 20%, right? So end of the day, many of these companies are backward integrated from a supply chain perspective, so they have less of a pricing pressure that they have to deal with, which means their margins are not coming down. So if you look at why the gross profit margin is still healthy in a market where commodity prices are growing up, this is the reason. And that's the reason we are going after those pockets. And many people have asked us this in the last 1.5 weeks. As we write, we communicate, some investors write back to us as well. So if you've been with us for, let's say, more than 1.5 years, you would have a reasonably good size position built in one of our earlier companies called IEX, right? Indian Energy Exchange. At these valuations in new portfolios, we're taking some time and being a bit cautious. Now, not because we don't like the business. I think anything and everything that can go right around IEX is going right? And as you can see, many people have also asked us, they asked us this maybe 6 months back, the portfolio, the valuation is double, price is double, why don't you exit? That's not how we think about risk either, right? These are structural companies. They're going through a structural change. These are very early stage growth stories the way we think about it. There are risks, but we will monitor those risks a long time. So for us, it's just not about saying it's a good company, let's buy it at any price. We will be cognizant of the valuations. There is a bit of euphoria building up in the business. I think from a fundamental perspective, the power shortage crisis that we are seeing, not so much in India, but more so in China, spreading to UK. I think somewhere it will affect India, though most of the Indian analysts believe that India is insulated. That's not my view. I think all of that is going to be a big tailwind for IEX. So I think it's important to realize that these are positions that are structural in nature. We will bring it into the new portfolios, but we'll be a bit cognizant from a valuation perspective. Third thing, why are we taking some time to deploy capital? Right? So the framework around which we think about risk at any point of time is to basically say, what is the sentiment in the market at any given time, and where is the maximum pain going to be if the market moves up or if the market moves down? Both can cause pain. In the last 1.5 years, I continued to maintain and believe and highlight that the pain was if the market moved up. The reason I continue to make that statement is every investor I spoke to always said this makes no sense. Right? They said valuations are making no sense, equity markets are overinflated, we are going to crash, we need a correction. This was the narrative right from June 20 all the way up till roughly around June 21. Somewhere there it started shifting. Today, the narrative has completely moved on to the other side. And this is the narrative that I'm hearing for the first time since we managed capital for the last 4.75 years. People are no longer talking about the downside. People are saying, how can I make money? In which sector can I make money next month? This is the narrative that we are dealing with today. And unfortunately or fortunately, India is always going to be a market where if US sneezes, India will catch some amount of cold. There is no denying it. So one needs to be cognizant of the sentiment of the market, the valuations of the market, and then obviously look at things from a micro portfolio perspective around the health. With where global risks are, what is happening around China, which I'll come to soon, what is happening around the US, around rates, around politics. We think that the risk reward can move to the downside fairly quickly. Right? So, end of the day, we want to be exercising prudence around capital allocation. This is not to say we want to be exiting stocks. That's not the point. The point is when we are making capital allocation decisions, we want to be exercising prudence. If you had heard us speak about capital allocation from a March 21 perspective, we would have been a lot aggressive, right? We would have deployed capital in, I would say, 20-25 days at that time. Today, the way I see things, it is going to take much longer. Gun pointed to my head, I would say roughly around 4 to 5 months. That's how we think about capital allocation, because for us, risk is always as important, in fact, more important than the upside, because the upside takes care of itself in equities, as long as you get your fundamentals right. How are we positioned from a portfolio perspective, right? So, like I said, the reason I highlighted the fact that most analysts have written off pharma, they think it's a COVID-related theme. It never was a COVID-related theme. It was a manufacturing-related theme with a lot of outsourcing happening into India, and where companies have backward integrated into the manufacturing supply chain, you would see significant tailwinds still come through, and that shows in our pharma exposure. We have exposure across large. We run a multi-cap fund. Though we don't think about risk from a large, mid, and small cap perspective, I break it down such that investors can bucket it if they want it along these lines. From our perspective, it's about cash flow growth. Whether I get it in a small cap like an IEX or a Nazara, or I get it in a large, a mid cap like a Syngene, or a large cap like HDFC Bank, it doesn't matter for us. What matters is the IRR that each of these businesses can generate. And that goes back to the cash flow growth that each of these businesses can generate, right? Moving on, the last theme that we want to be covering, right? And this is a narrative that's been spun in the media. And I think most analysts have also bought into this narrative. The narrative currently is China plus one story, along with all the negative news around China. Started off with EdTech, started off with Bitcoin being banished, started off with capital flow getting affected. That was a narrative again. Capital started off with diversification of the US manufacturing into India, means FII flows into China have stopped. Right? This was the broad narrative. And with whatever China is doing with Australia on the power side, causing coal shortages, there is even more of a fuel to the fire saying that India flows are going to increase from FIIs and are increasing from FIIs. So the hypothesis has been laid by the media, by the analyst community at large. And we wanted to be testing this because it didn't make sense as far as we were concerned. So let me give you some data points just to understand why it doesn't make sense and what is actually happening on the ground. Right? The FII flows into India over the last 6 months have not materially increased. And this graph basically explains that. It tells you over the last 1 year, calendar year, how much have the FII flows grown. So between March, which was the peak, March 31st, to September end, which is where we stand as of today, the FII flows have not materially changed into India, right? So I'm putting two graphs without naming the two graphs for a reason. There's one graph on the left, which talks about the FII flows into a certain country. There is one graph on the right, which talks about FII flows into another country. If I put this in the public domain and ask the media to say what, the media would say the left is clearly India. Right? Unfortunately, that's not the case. The left is China. So while people are basically saying that China money is coming out, no. The marginal dollar from Asian funds or US endowments are going into China. Right? I'm not saying the money is not coming into India, but bigger money has actually come into India in the past. Flows have been strong. I'm not saying anything around that. Flows will be strong because we continue to believe India is an inflection point. But the narrative saying that China outflows is benefiting India is not true. At least that's not what data is telling us. So if that's not what is the case, where is the outflow even coming from as far as Asia is concerned? Because from an US endowment perspective, it's emerging market risk. And within that, there's a China bucket, there is a Japan bucket, there is India bucket, there is Taiwan bucket, Korea bucket. So effectively, what's happening through this table is it explains to you the FII inflows on a year-on-year basis. Right? So where are the outflows? The outflows are not from China, it's from ASEAN. Korea has seen a lot of outflows. With the semiconductor shortage, Taiwan has seen a lot of outflows. Indonesia, Thailand. So ASEAN has basically been given lesser weightage, and that's why the money has actually gone in China and then into India. So basically, it's important to realize the fact that when a narrative is being spun, unless and until we back it out with data, it doesn't really give us the full picture. So that's something that I wanted to break down. So if FI inflow has not massively caused this move up, what is it? It's the domestics, right? So effectively, the money that has flowed into India significantly, which has propped up the equity markets at large, right, over the last 6 months, has been predominantly domestic money. Now, there is no narrative that I'm basically saying which says FI money is sticky, which is good, or domestic money is bad. No. End of the day, money flow is money flow. When money flow comes into equities, that props up prices, it's good for the country. But it's important to realize where or what kind of investors are propping up the market, because that gives us a sense of risk reward at any point of time. And it's important to split the narrative from the actual facts. So final thoughts to conclude this presentation before we move into the Q&A, right? Clearly, we've been saying this for a while. It's nothing new today. Environment from an equity perspective is its best, right? The sentiment is good. Earnings growth is back. India is at an inflection point as far as the global investor is concerned. It's strong. The fundamental shape of our portfolio at ITIS, we believe, is robust, measured by how I spoke to you about the cash flow growth. The inflows into India are driven by domestic inflows rather than the China plus one narrative that keeps being thrown out in the market. India continues to be, this is from a global investor, multiple global investor conferences that we've been part of. India continues to be the best geography from a risk deployment perspective. The risks in the near term, according to us, continue to stem from a global perspective. People don't talk about risks today. Where can it come from? It can come from multiple sides. It can come from input inflationary pressures. It could come from power prices escalating. At the moment, no one talks about it, which means there is a risk that one needs to be wary of as well. And finally, I'd like to say that the laxity in the market, especially around the sentiment when I talk to investors, as well as the expectation naturally on the back of it, seems to be at an all-time high. So around this, I want to end our presentation and open the floor to Q&A. We can obviously take any questions around markets, portfolios, stocks, as you deem appropriate.
Thank you, Naveen, for the update. Participants who have questions can feel free to type their questions in the Q&A section. The identity of the investors is protected, as the Q&A section will only be available to panelists. Participants can now type in their questions. Naveen, I have a question here. How do you see the market over the next 3 years?
So if I can take a medium-term view on the market, right, I would put my hand up and say we are at an extremely strong position as far as India is concerned. I think after a very long time, the sentiment from the domestic as well as the international investor community is aligning together. There are really strong companies on the ground which are actually consolidating, with its balance sheet being its cleanest that we have seen in the last 10 years. All of this basically makes one believe, and makes me believe, that from a cash flow compounding perspective, we should see the Nifty compound at 10 to 12%, and which means our portfolio should compound at high teens. So I'm fairly optimistic. In fact, I would say extremely optimistic about India from a 3-year perspective. Right? However, I would also say that it's not going to be one size fit all market, right? There are going to be inflationary pressures on the ground. And that is clear. And their supply chain is disrupted, not in one industry, it's disrupted across multiple industries. So I think one needs to be paying attention to all of this rather than saying I will buy any company at any price and things will be hunky-dory. So I think it's a combination of mixing the fact that corporate India is at its best. We have the ability to basically grow our cash flows. And within that, how do we build the best portfolio possible?
Okay. There's another question. The investor wants to know how help him understand the investment into Alembic, and as they have scaled down US site operations and their manpower. How do you see it?
So I think Alembic is an interesting play primarily because of the fact that they were extremely aggressive about the US portfolio. So it's a good drug called Sartans. It is a generic. It has come out of the IP phase. So, and at that point of time, Alembic was a market leader, still is a market leader in Sartans, which is why it's a significant contributor to their top line even today. And they had everything going from a volume growth as well as a price growth perspective. And once basically there was too much of stocking among hospitals, the demand for Sartans dropped, and that resulted in a price fall. So end of the day, it is one drug which caused a fairly significant degrowth from a top line perspective, which should put near-term pricing pressure. The good thing about the business, though, is the India-centric API manufacturing business, mostly from the generic side, is still growing in a robust way. So there is a push and pull. The US is going to continue to see headwinds. The India side is going to see tailwinds. So end of the day, it reflects in our position sizing on Alembic as well. If you look at it, it's, I would say, roughly around 2% as we speak. I don't see us increasing it. If anything, we might look at reducing it depending on how the next few quarter earnings grow, as well as how some of the pricing pressure in the US drops. Because end of the day, any stock in our portfolio has an opportunity cost. So we'll have to evaluate that before we take a final decision. But it is the position size reflects our view on what we think about the business from a growth perspective.
Thank you, Naveen. So, Naveen, there's another question. Will your strategy involve active cash calls, or will you predominantly be stay invested?
So one thing I'd like to clarify, this is not an active cash call, and neither is it a market call, because it is end of the day saying, how do I exercise risk reward prudence when I allocate capital? Most funds in the market that I am aware of go in with the approach that I have been given money by an investor, which means I have to put it into the market tomorrow. Right? I think that is what an ETF generally does, right? According in my mind, that's not the reason why we exist. I think people come to us for two reasons: A, to actually have the ability to pick good quality compounders as well as hold on to these companies as they are growing, and B, have some sense of valuation and risk reward discipline around how you're allocating capital. So today, at a time where we have to aggressively pay up to own good businesses, we are basically deploying the capital in a slightly more phased out manner. Now, what does this mean? Right? I'll give you two parts that can happen. Assume that India is a straight line bull market. So Nifty goes from here, 17.5 or whatever it is, to 20,000 in a straight line. Effectively, there will be ETF like funds who will outperform ITIS in the next 6 months. Right? And that's something that I'm perfectly fine with, because we are not managing money with a 6-month view. Right? And investors who come to us have always understood this philosophy. And that's the reason we spend a lot of time with investors as well. Right? The other phase that can happen is volatility, which we see pick up over the next few months. And with that volatility, and again, I'm not concerned about market volatility, I'm concerned about company specific volatility, because that's when interests us. Maximum money is made when you have market volatility along with company specific volatility. When you get that, it's brilliant. Sometimes you'll get only one of this. At that point of time, you will see us being more aggressive. Right? So I'm never going to come out and say the market is going to go up or down, because I have no clue. All I'm saying is we have a sense of risk reward. We want to be incorporating that in the form of discipline around capital allocation. And because that's what a CEO does, right? So think of it this way. You will not look at a CEO of a company where anyone and everyone wants to do a buyout an M&A, buy out a company in the form of an M&A, and he would basically go out and say, even everyone is participating in an M&A, I also want to participate. If you as a shareholder want to be invested in such companies, then I will question that. That's all I'm saying, right? Because the CEO has to allocate capital in a prudent way, and that's what we're doing as well in the fund.
Okay. Thank you, Naveen, for that. What do you see as immediate concerns for India, and any sectors you see which is going to be affected by this, and any sectors you are bullish on?
Okay, so I'll take the easy question first. Obviously, the companies that we are invested in, we are bullish on, right? Otherwise, we would not be invested in. So if you talk, so we don't look at sector-wise bullishness. For us, it's always company. So I'm not bullish on pharma. I'm bullish on Syngene, I'm bullish on Alchem Labs, I'm bullish on Indoco Remedies, right? Doesn't mean I'm bullish on pharma. So it's always important to realize, while people come out and say themes, I will always caveat that we will always come out and say individual companies. I'm not saying I'm bullish on power, but I'm bullish on Indian Energy Exchange, because the dynamics that are working within the two are very different, right? In power transmission, you are dealing with debt-heavy businesses. That's not the place I will go to, right? In an Indian Energy Exchange, you are dealing with a huge operating leverage business, right? So, but they are both power, if I from a sector perspective. So how can I be bullish on power? So I will never talk sectors. We will have sector exposure because of the companies that we own. That doesn't mean I'm bullish on a sector. So that's the easy part. Now, in terms of risks that I see in the market, obviously, in a bull market, no one talks about risks, because some people think it is foolish to talk about risks. But I would want to think about risks in a bull market, right? I think, see, while sitting in India, one may not appreciate it, but whatever is happening around US politics, whatever is happening around the fact that there is a big tech breakup being spoken about with the Democrats in hand, there is a Federal Reserve handover due early next year when the end of the Yellen regime comes into play. How is the new regime going to react? All of these are risks, and we'll have to deal with it. But in terms of micro specific risks, I am thinking very actively around the power sector. I am not very clear yet that this is an isolated event around China. And I don't think this is going away in a hurry either. I think power shortages could escalate. And if it does, it has ramifications on input costs of businesses across the board. One needs to realize that in India, we always have a 20% excess capacity to use diesel, though we've not used it. But diesel availability is always, it comes under question because can we use it? We don't know. It's a wild card. We're not sure how that plays out. So to me, there are risks in the system. If we choose to ignore it today, can in the next 2 quarters that surface out in terms of margin pressure from companies that report, we'll see. But end of the day, I think it's more so a global perspective I'm worried about risk rather than an Indian perspective. I think from an Indian corporate balance sheet perspective, I would say there are less risks. There are less risks on the micro, there are more risks on the macro, which is what makes it a lot harder.
Okay, got it. Thanks. So I have another question. Say, why is that we don't invest in monopoly businesses like IRCTC?
So I think fair question. With the benefit of hindsight, we should have. That was a miss. Is the easy answer. So IRCTC is a great business. It is monopolistic. The only risk that people forget, and I would say if someone has invested in it, they should hold on to it. However, they should be aware of a risk. In 2016 or 17, the government basically came out and said ticket prices should be cut by half. Right. So end of the day, any regulated business which has a government intervention potential possibility has these kind of tail risks that we will never factor in our day-to-day operations of the business. And these risks increase as the market cap of the business increases. So this is the only thing that I would say, that we don't own the business. I'm obviously now unable to buy the business at these valuations. It's a great business. If anyone holds on, I would say hold on. But yeah, it's not like it was a conscious decision not to. I would say it was more of a miss.
Sure. So I have another question. Up to what extent can we attribute this bull run to liquidity in the market?
I mean, I wish life was that easy that we can explain, we can break down the fact that, so I mean, it's like asking up to what extent can we attribute the number of unicorns that are created in India to liquidity? I mean, how do you answer this question, right? It has ramifications. I mean, this is not a cause effect relationship. Obviously, liquidity means people are chasing good companies, and if you are even half decent, you are going to get flow of capital, and that means you're going to get abnormally benefited, right? So, and additional mistakes will also be made. So I think be it Bitcoin, be it crypto, be it NFTs, be it private capital chasing VCs, be it public market valuations being fairly expensive in the so-called traditional world, everything has to do with the liquidity environment, right? So that's not going to go away, but how much of it, is it 50%, is it 60%, is it 70%, is anyone's guess. And to be honest, I'm not sure that's so important either, because I don't think liquidity is going to get sucked out anytime soon. There is risk that it will get withdrawn, but it's not going to be like a 1 to 0 event. It never is. If you study history, and it's not the first time we are seeing liquidity driven rallies, right? Every 5-7 years, you see liquidity driven moves. Just that this is to a magnitude which has not been seen before. So the same cause and effect relationship will repeat, but the question is when, right? And if anyone says, I have the ability to time a liquidity exit, I would say that's not a prudent strategy.
I have another question. For new investors coming now, what is your deployment plan? How much will you keep in cash?
So as we speak, I'll tell you what the facts are, right? Roughly, we are roughly around 50 to 55% is invested for new investors. Approximately 45% is in liquids. Now, this would slowly get deployed in the market. In this kind of a market, if you say put a timeline to it, I would say anywhere roughly between 4 to 4.5 months, I see it fully getting deployed. It could be slower if we go on a one-way upstream as well, right? So these are the two independent parts that the person who asked the question, this is how I would say they should look at their portfolio getting ramped up.
What is your take on Zomato or any tech IPOs like Policy Bazaar and Nykaa?
So I think it's wrong to combine all of these as tech IPOs, right? Because these are all very individual businesses. Zomato, I think we've written a fairly detailed article about it. We spoke about it pre-IPO, where I basically said that this would be one of the best subscribed IPOs. FI investor community is going to be significant. That means the IPO is going to do significantly well. But I am bearish the business. I don't like the corporate governance of the company. We had highlighted this in our article, so we'll be happy to send that across to you if it's relevant for you, right? So Nykaa, I think it's a brilliant business. I think we've spoken about Nykaa, we've spoken about the beauty segment in our last quarterly call. And the only thing that I will highlight is beauty is one segment where as you age, you tend to spend more. Apart from hospitals, there is no other segment where, and you tend to spend more in a happy way. Unfortunately, in hospitals, you tend to spend more in a sad way, and that's not a very happy feeling as a shareholder, especially if you're a ESG shareholder. So, end of the day, beauty as a category is a brilliant category. And I think Nykaa has actually built a true platform. And how do I define a true platform? The participants of the platform are sticky to you, right? When Estee Lauder's 75% of its India sales comes from Nykaa, you can look at it in two ways. If Estee Lauder goes away, Nykaa loses money. I would look at it as another way. Estee Lauder's India strategy is now defined by Nykaa, right? So that's not going away. So when you have that kind of a sticky platform, and I would always say, channel checks in something like Nykaa is very simple. To me, I order through my wife, and as a consumer, you can all. I speak to my wife. I speak to a lot of ladies. 90% of them are extremely happy with how the policy of refunds is, the products that you get, and I think the customer satisfaction in terms of how you measure your NPS score on the brand is very high. I don't think the business is going to be, business is going to be expensive. Whatever I'm saying, I think it's, people should know, right? So it's going to be oversubscribed. So it's a great business. I really like the business, and it shows in the quality of the promoter and their shareholding as well. Policy Bazaar, we haven't done too much of work on it yet to have a really strong view. So I'll reserve that view for now. So I think each business has its pros and cons, and you'll have to view it along with the capability and the corporate governance of the management, rather than bucket everything as tech IPO and they are loss making, so I will not touch it. I don't think that's a sensible way to look at each of these businesses.
Naveen, I have a last question. Would you look at the churn ratio going up if the market is a bit uncertain?
So I don't think our churn ratio has anything to do with market uncertainty, right? Our churn ratio has to do with risk reward of individual businesses. Why did IndiaMart get out, right? If you look at it, it was a fundamental perspective on the business at a time where I expected top line to grow a lot more aggressively. The percentage of ASP of the product on the platform to go up, and the percentage of subscription to go up, and maybe some more new initiatives from the management to increase. That's the time I see expenses being reduced, employee costs going down, and teams being trimmed. Now, this is not a good growth business as far as I'm concerned. I could be wrong. My promoter could change, but the data doesn't say that as of now. Along with that, the competition is scaling up capital in an aggressive way. So it has nothing to do with the market. It has a lot to do with the micro of the business. So if the micro of the business changes, we will exit, right? So the churn ratio is going to be defined by that. It's historically been around 20%, and I don't think it's going to go up at all from here.
Sure, Naveen, that's about the question. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for your call. If there are any questions that are not answered, right, we'll pick them up and we'll most likely individually look at answering them back to you and sending it to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Naveen and Ajit. Thanks a lot. And I thank you all once again for your patience on the call. So the recording of this webinar will be sent out once it's made available. Wishing you all a wonderful weekend, and please stay safe.